This is Andy Purewal for ID Boxing. I'm here in London and I'm joined by Andy Clarke over Zoom. Andy, you're in a hotel room, so you might be in London yourself. Firstly, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. I'm actually up in Sheffield. I'm on a bit of a Yorkshire tour. I've got a card in Rotherham tomorrow night, and then one in Doncaster on Saturday. So I've escaped. I've escaped London for a couple of days.
As bad as Andy, I don't know whether that's kind of a good thing or a bad thing for yourself because you're getting away from the madness of everything that's going on in the last 24 hours or so. Straight into it, obviously, we heard the news that Conor Benn had tested positive for clomiphene from a test conducted by VADA. I just want you to get your immediate reaction to when you heard the news, Andy. What went through your mind?
Well, when you hear that anybody's returned an adverse finding, a positive test, however they want to describe it, then your heart always sinks because although we do need people to be caught, otherwise there's no real point having testing. If nobody ever tested positive, then you couldn't fool yourself that you were in a clean sport. It would just be indicative of the fact that the testing was completely ineffective. So your heart sinks when you see that, and then you immediately think, what's going to happen now? And reading that statement from Matchroom, reading through it and going through their justification of why they were going to proceed with the fight, I could see how the loopholes, if you like, for want of a better phrase, were there for them to be able to do that. And you could see that, when you kind of have a little bit of experience in these situations, you could see that it's a very, very, I was going to say imperfect scenario. It's not even nearly that good, but you could see how they were going to, what the reasoning was and how they were going to manage to do it. But then when the board put out their statement saying that they basically were vetoing it, that they were prohibiting it, then at that point I thought, okay, well this is completely different now because they're the governing body of the sport in the country, and they are supposed to be the ones who decide what happens and what doesn't happen, and people are supposed to listen to them. And the fact that they said that they decided that the previous evening and that they told everybody involved that morning, and so the promoter's statement came out after that, I mean, again, that just added another layer to the whole thing. And then when you learn that this adverse finding, that people were aware of it from September the 23rd onwards, I think it was. What you ask yourself is, and these are questions you almost don't want to answer, what you ask yourself is, if that story hadn't broken, what would have happened? Would anyone have said anything? Would the board have put out their statement if they hadn't been forced to address it? Or was everybody just going to keep quiet? That's the question you have to ask. And now we're in a situation where the last thing I saw from Eddie was that he's not going to try and do this via Malta or Luxembourg, which means the only way the fight can go ahead is if they win a legal battle or legal argument, which means that they are entitled to put it on, and that the Board of Control weren't legally able to do what they did yesterday by saying that they were going to prohibit it, and they would then have to do a complete U-turn. But if that happens, then what's the point of having any kind of rules or regulations or governing bodies? That's what you've got to wonder if this fight goes ahead. I understand the financial pressure that Matchroom are under here because this is a huge thing for DAZN. I get it. I completely get it. And human beings, we do what is in our best interest. That's what everybody always does. And when an event like this looks like it's going to fall apart, your survival instinct is we've got to save it, because how can this not happening possibly be in our best interest? But then when things develop, I guess what I'm hoping is that they will come to the conclusion that doing this, even if they can do it, is not long-term in their best interest. And I know that'll take some explaining to DAZN, but I'm just hoping that that's the conclusion they come to. Just because you can do something, it doesn't always mean that you should, because we talk about boxing being the Wild West, and we all have a bit of a chuckle about it at times. And you know, we kind of almost laugh at other sports sometimes with kind of all the rules and regulations they have and all the rest of it. We're always aware that, you know, we could do with a few more ourselves. But if this fight goes ahead, then, like I said, it really is the Wild West then, in a sense, because it would appear that you can just implement one system of testing and then just ignore it if it doesn't suit you, and then side with the one that does suit you. And then if the governing body say that they don't want it, then, you know, you could just ignore that as well. I mean, it's a mess, isn't it?
Andy, how damaging of a look does this bring to the sport with all of the legal ongoings and battles in the background, and how the information's broke over the last 24 hours? When you consider how dangerous of a sport boxing is, how damaging of a look does this bring to it?
It's damaging. There's no question about that. And that's one thing we haven't even touched on, is the fighter safety, the fighter welfare issue here, because if something were to happen on Saturday, then that would be absolutely catastrophic. And it would be the sport of boxing that would carry the can for it. One thing that's always difficult to calculate when you do what we do, when you're right on the inside of this bubble, is they're looking to appeal to the wider sporting public with this fight. How many people in that bracket will actually even really care if this fight goes ahead? You know, will they even really care about what's happened the last 2 or 3 days if this fight goes ahead? I really hope the answer is yes, that they do, because that again would you know, add more fuel to the, I was going to say, tidal wave of public opinion that is now against this fight. But that's my point. I don't know if it is a tidal wave or not, because most people I speak to, we think it would be a bad idea for this fight to go ahead. Any boxing fan I've spoken to agree with what the board have done. People agree with the stance that the board have taken and feel like this fight shouldn't go on. But I just don't know whether that kind of sentiment stretches much beyond us, to be honest, because we are a niche sport. But whatever happens, it's going to be damaging. If this fight does go ahead, then all we can hope is that it passes off without any kind of incident or physical damage of any serious nature to either one of them.
That again leads into my next question. When you consider, you know, Eubank Senior's reservations over Junior having to make weight, a catch weight of 157, and you consider obviously his previous bout with Michael Watson, what happened there, and obviously Benn and McClellan, what happened there. The concerns are kind of already in place of how dangerous boxing can be. You're going over what could happen on Saturday. If Conor Benn was to inflict some form of a life-changing injury, shall we say, it really could cause a further issue for the sport.
Absolutely. If that was to happen, then I really don't know where we would go or what we could say as a sport. We just wouldn't have a leg to stand on. It's as simple as that. And it doesn't matter that that's unlikely. It's a possibility. And the image of the sport, the welfare of the sport, the welfare and the health of the fighters, that always has to be the most important thing. And nobody can come up with any kind, even remotely convincing argument against what you just said there. No one, because there isn't one. Because if this fight goes ahead, you are taking that risk and you are gambling that won't happen. And we're all aware that in the vast majority of fights, thank God, it doesn't happen. But we're all aware that on occasion it does. And Nigel Benn and Chris Eubank Sr. know that better than anyone. I mean, there's going to be, I don't think we should try and paint the people involved here in some kind of demonic way, because they'll be wrestling with this. These are hard decisions. They're in a difficult position. They are in a difficult position because this is a multi-million-pound event we're talking about here. And we know the landscape with Matchroom and DAZN, and we know how badly kind of DAZN need this. And people could take a very hardline stance and say, well, right's right and wrong's wrong. And I agree with that. But at the same time, you have to try and you have to try and empathise with the situation that people are in. It doesn't mean you agree with it. It doesn't mean that you sympathise. Empathy and sympathy are not the same thing. But you do need to try and do that. You need to try and put yourself in their position and try and think, what is it that they are thinking at the moment? What is it that they are weighing up? Because it won't be easy. But the fact that Eddie said that he's not going to do it via another licensee, Luxembourg or Malta, that's a good thing. You know, for me, that's kind of a start. Earlier today, I was thinking, well, this is just going to happen, isn't it? They're going to push this through. But now I'm beginning to wonder. I'm beginning to wonder whether they might be beginning to think, like I said, is this now really in our best interest to continue with this fight? Because I think the answer is no. I think long term, I really don't think it is. Yeah, that's what I'm hoping.
And there's obviously going to be a number of unanswered questions surrounding this fight now, but just looking at Conor and where his career can go from here, if he was to win on Saturday or if he was to lose, it is now a lose-lose situation for him, because people will look at what's happened in these last 24 hours and obviously leading up to the fight and all the talk about his foul test. If he was to win, it's tainted. If he was to lose, he's going to be looked at as a man who had the positive test result come back and didn't have enough in him to beat Eubank Jr. So does that not give more of kind of a reason to just pull back from this fight?
Yeah, it does. It does. It really does. The reasons for it going ahead are basically financial. I mean, it's as simple as that. And there are all sorts of people who will want this to go ahead, not just, you know, who are maybe slightly kind of peripheral to the event, but are working on it in some capacity. There'll be plenty of people who will want this to go ahead. But again, you know, you've made another very kind of good common sense point there, and these are all the things that I'm hoping are being evaluated, and I'm sure they are. Bit by bit, they should tip the scales down on the side of, we shouldn't really be doing this. Because for Conor, you know, this is a serious situation for him, and he's going to have questions to answer. How did that trace element of this drug get into his sample, into his system? He's going to have to answer that. The B sample will get tested eventually. Quite why that has to take so long, I've got no idea. No one's ever really been able to explain that to me. But as we know, the A sample and the B sample, it's the same urine. You know, I've been in drug testing rooms, and you know, it's the same stuff in two different beakers. That's basically what it is. And the reason they take two is because you need a backup, basically, in case the A sample is after it's collected is somehow tampered with or contaminated or lost. You know, that's why you have the B sample. The chances of the B sample being any different results-wise to the A sample are really, really small. It basically never happens except for in situations like that. So, and also mentally, is he in any fit state to fight now after all that's been going on the last few days? Is he really? I mean, we're still only on Thursday, and this seems to have been going on for a really long time. We've got the whole rest of today, whole rest of tomorrow, and he's got all day on Saturday before they finally get in the ring. You know, the more you think about it, the more you kind of, as I say, place all these things on the scales, the more it makes you think. Me, it does anyway. Maybe I'm a bit optimistic or naive or whatever. But just hearing us talk about it out loud, it makes me a bit more optimistic that it's not going to happen. But I wouldn't bet on it.
Well, Andy, I'm sure you're a busy man now, so I'm waiting to get into this press conference. If it goes ahead, we're still waiting for news and update on that front. So I appreciate your time. I'll leave you to prepare for your show tomorrow night. Thanks for speaking to me in ID Boxing.
No problem. Cheers, Andy.